So we are in a new month, a new day, a new era, a new something. Something's going on. I don't know what it is. And I wanted to look this month at meditations of the Spirit. Last month we spoke about service. And there is a method to my madness, although I don't always tell you what it is, lest you hold me accountable to it. But, it occurs to me that we basically hold that there's 5 pillars of our practice. There's service, there's giving, there's prayer, there's meditation and visioning, and there's study. So each month I'm going to take a more in-depth look at that in terms of how do we continue to practice. You see, ours is not a teaching or a philosophy that says you must agree to the following 10 items. We didn't have a little council that got together and said, this is what we believe and this is what you will believe. We don't do a lot of dogma. But we do have some practices, and I think it's important to return to that. We are not going to spend the entire month just talking about meditation, breathing in and out, but although that probably wouldn't be a bad thing. But this idea that I wanted to look at today is the idea around listening. And you say, get on with it, I'm listening, right? In fact, I have something I'd like to say in response to that, you're thinking, right? So listening is more of an art than we realize sometimes. Not only listening to each other, but really listening to the divine. I loved what Helen Keller said. She said, the best and most beautiful things cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart. That we want to learn how to live in a state of being. So we're sort of conditioned in the times in which we live to live in a state of doing. We do this, we do that, we do this, let's be productive, let's get things done, da-da-da-da-da. And more so, what I notice is that our lives are increasingly filled with stuff, with information. And I'm guilty. I don't want to, we have to have our cell phones with us, and we have to have our, we have TV and we have internet, and we have all this sort of thing so that we're bombarded with information. And so what a rare and wonderful gift it is to simply be still and listen to the whisperings of Spirit. I was reminded, I was revisiting The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and I was struck. Everything I've picked up actually in the last few days has been just struck by. And so when that happens, that this talk is for me. I'm glad you're here. You're welcome to listen in, but just want you to know this one's for me. Because what he spoke to in one particular chapter is, he says this: the spiritual journey is one of constant transformation. That in order to grow, you must give up the struggle to remain the same and learn to embrace change at all times. Do you want to breathe with me on that one? And so what I realized as I was thinking about my childhood was that I grew up in a spiritual tradition, a traditional Christian background, and sort of the implication was that if you lived well and played by the rules and did right, there would come a time when you would leave this earthly coil behind and you would get to go to heaven, and you were kind of done. It's lovely and blissful and wonderful and great. Now, if you didn't, the consequences of that weren't so great. But, we're still going for the heaven program, right? That heaven was this state of consciousness that we would get to on the other side. Now, I left that tradition at a fairly young age, only, for a number of reasons. That was kind of a blessing, but because I felt as if, not that what they were teaching was somehow wrong, but that it was limited, that it was constricted. I didn't like that it was kind of an exclusive club that got to go to heaven. It's kind of like a country club, and it had to be the Baptist country club, but, whatever. And so I began to question, and life happened, so I didn't do that. And so it was a number of years before I came back into any kind of spiritual community, having created some crisis in my life, which is always an opening for greater good. I found myself in a center very similar to this, with teachings that were new and earth-shaking and wonderful. And they were teaching the science of mind and how that if you could change your consciousness, you could change your experience of life. And one of the things that I noticed out of that was over time I began to sort of move into a new, improved metaphysical understanding of life, but I still had sort of this old mentality around that somehow once I got my consciousness right, I would enter into a state of heaven and I would live a peaceful existence without challenges or problems. Are we going to raise our hands now? You want to have a little confessional moment here? Right? Isn't that kind of what we do? It's like, if I could just get it right, then I'm done. But oh, no. Michael Singer says to us, your spiritual journey is one of constant transformation. And he says this. Now, if you didn't like the first part, you're going to love this. One of the most important areas requiring change is how we solve our personal problems. Really? So he says real transformation is when you embrace your problems as agents for growth. So let's call it a day. You got it? We don't need to speak further, right? Because you're right there with me like, yes, or not. You see, because some of us would rather solve the problem. Either get rid of it, make it different, or whatever. So bear with me on this. He uses this amazingly clear example. And he says, if you had a thorn, and the thorn was in your arm, and it was directly hitting a nerve, then you have a couple of options. And one is to do everything you can to protect it so that nothing causes pain to you. Right? And so you create a bubble around yourself in the hopes that no one can ever get too close, that you don't bump into anything, that nothing happens that's going to trigger the pain. And that's great, unless you fall in love and they want to get close to you. And you're like, no, sure, I love you, but stay away from the arm, right? He says then, and I'm reminded of that story about the guy that goes to the doctor and he says, Doctor, I've got this pain. He says, where's the pain? It's like, he's right here. And he says, does it hurt all the time? He says, no, it only hurts when I touch it. He says, well, then stop touching it, right? Isn't that what we want to do? Is stop touching it. Couldn't be there if I don't, right? So the second option is to see the source of pain and remove it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I got up early for that little piece of wisdom. Well, right? All those other options I had available to me, and I came for that, right? So either create a bubble around yourself so your pain is never triggered, or remove the source of the pain. You say, that's simple, that's easy. What kind of a fool wouldn't do that? Well, I'm about to tell you what kind of a fool wouldn't do that. You and I. And I'm not talking now about the external. I'm talking about the internal. What happens when we experience internal thorns? When we have painful experiences in our life, and our decision to solve that problem is to never expose ourselves to pain again. So if we had a painful relationship that ended in sadness and dissolving, one option is never get in relationship again. Right? Because you know what those people do. They just trigger that pain in you, and so you're like, nope, bubble, nope, stay away, right? So the other option is to not live in a bubble, not put yourself separate from life, not do that, but to solve the problem by embracing what it is. By recognizing where that pain is sourced from and being willing to embrace that pain as the source of our healing and our transformation. Now, I know I may get in trouble with the science of mind police on this one today, because sometimes we're going to just pray it away. And I wouldn't going to suggest to you maybe we just want to pray our way through it. You see, As it turns out, that trying to protect ourselves from life or from your problem actually becomes the perfect reflection of the problem itself. I often say it this way. I say that which we try and run away from, we run into. Right? And so we say, okay, well, I'm experiencing loneliness, and so I don't want to feel the pain of my loneliness, so I'm going to get into a relationship to solve the source of my pain. The only problem with that is once I get into the relationship, you may not recognize how you're supposed to perform and behave to not trigger the thorn. I, on the other hand, now begin to think, well, gee, in order for me to remain in this relationship, who do I think I must be in order for you to want to be with me in that relationship? Right? There's a term for it. Right? Called codependency. Like I always like to say, it's very simple. What that is when you ask the question, how are you? You say, how do you think I am? This is how you know if you're codependent. If you get the right? So it turns out that then, having not resolved at the core level what the issue is, then we just, in our trying to avoid it, we actually recreate it, reflects back to us, and it's almost as if it keeps happening over and over and over. I say in the early part of my life, before I was the enlightened soul that you see today, I created the same relationship over and over and over. Different faces, different places, same darn relationship. And it was like, how do they know this? This was before email even was available. So I was like, how are they all getting this information? Turns out that who we are is what we experience in our life. So another way to begin to look at this is to realize that the pain is a part of inevitability of life and of living. It is a blessing, if you will. The Buddha taught us that the source of our suffering, which is different from pain, I would have you know, the source of our suffering comes through our resistance or through our attachment. We see, okay, I've got it all figured out. Life is perfect right now. How do I keep it this way? Don't anybody move, right? Nothing change. And that never works. So it's that resistance, that clutching, that longing, that attachment to it being the same way. So the Buddha was teaching us then that if we could learn to move into our inner state of awareness, we would begin to realize that life is a constant flow, and that our job as spiritual beings is to be in flow with it. Many years ago, I studied with a wonderful man. His name was Shenzhen Young, when I was in the School of Ministry, which is tomorrow will be exactly 100 years ago, I'm sure of it. And in this course, I got to study with this man who was just so fabulous and brilliant and wonderful. He started his journey as a Jew in LA, and then somehow found himself as a Buddhist monk in Japan. So a few things changed along his journey, but he was brilliant. He taught me Vipassana meditation, but he also taught me so much more. And what I particularly loved about him, he knew about 5 different languages, one in particular which was Sanskrit. But what he helped me to understand is that language is the way we think. And so people with different languages think somewhat differently. It's part of the value of learning other languages and studying other cultures. We don't all think the same way. Part of some of the problems we have, I believe, in the world, in our willingness to go out and serve or kill or whatever it is we do as Americans in the world, sometimes we think as if we just go, they'll all want apple pie and moms, just like we do, right? And sometimes that doesn't work out so well. Anyways, I digress. You see, because we don't always understand the culture. We don't always understand different ways of being. So in this work with him, what he began to help me to understand was there's a process that happens internally for us. You see, we're not just in a way of being, there's a process that happens, and as we can learn to slow down through meditation, we can begin to distinguish from the voice of spirit and the voice of our ego. We can begin to hear the divine promptings. And the divine promptings are never frantic and obsessed. Turns out, who knew, right? And some of you are thinking, you only have two voices in your head? No, there's plenty more, but I'm just taking the two main ones, right? There's that part of me that says you should do something, you should blah, 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 blah. And then there's a part of me that says, be still and know. And as we're working in meditation, we're beginning to differentiate. So we begin to see that thoughts sort of rise and then they fall away. That sensations in the body rise and they fall away. Feelings, emotions rise and they fall away. And so when we're in the practice of meditation, of being still with that, of observing, of being in the witness mind, then we remain at peace. But too often what we do is we get reactive. We move right back into our reactive mind. Some of you came this morning at 9:30 and said, I'm ready. I'm going to sit in meditation. The music was playing softly, a lovely prayer, and you said, here I go, I'm breathing. Did I leave the coffee pot on? Who's going to take out the trash? What are we going to do for lunch? Right? And off you go. But you see, the trick is the non-attachment, to simply name it, to say thought, and bring your attention and awareness back to the breath. To say sensation, and bring the attention back to the breath. To simply continue to release and allow what is arising and falling, and noticing that the same thing is happening in our breath, that we're breathing in, we're breathing out. And even as we become more aware, we become aware of those subtle points where the out-breath becomes the in-breath, and the in-breath becomes the out-breath. And we realize that it is all a state of flow, and there is a state of peace, and there is a state of being that goes with that. It is when we move into that consciousness that we begin to realize that pain is not a thing of itself. You see, when we are trying to avoid pain, and trust me, don't we all have many mechanisms for avoiding it? Right? It's part of why addiction is so prevalent. It is that wanting to avoid pain. You know, the biggest addictive thing going on today is through painkillers. Crazy, isn't it? So what we can realize is that pain is a part of our experience. In fact, it's a part of our blessing of being human. It is part of what feeds back to us, to the world, that something is not right. So it is not about resisting the pain, but rather embracing it and realizing that it's a temporary sensation. You see, I love what Michael Singer says to us, is he says that since your inner thorns are simply blocked energy from the past, they can be released. It's just an energetic field. It is not a thing of itself. It is not the thing. So you see, we cannot never change our past, but we can fundamentally change our relationship with the past. And so it is then that we say, aha, that hurts, but we're not then going down the rabbit hole with that pain. And how do I avoid it? How do I get away from it? We're just breathing through it. And it is then that we are learning to enhance and experience something different. The image that comes to mind is that when a woman is in labor, giving birth to a child, turns out there's some pain associated with that. And what do they say? Breathe. Breathe into the pain. Breathe into the experience. So too, metaphorically, when something is trying to be born in us, we need to breathe into the experience. You see, one of the things that I know happens is that one of the ways we enter into the spiritual kingdom that Jesus spoke of, the spiritual dimension, often feels as if it is thrust upon us. feels as if our world has come crashing down. Sometimes it feels like a violent attack from something dark and dreadful. I want you to understand this, that the spiritual journey is not always filled with love and light. Aren't you glad you got up this morning, really? Right? It is not always filled with love and light. Love and light is the experience that we go through, but the journey itself can take us into dark places. And nothing, there are little good kids in here. I was going to say nothing pisses off more than finding out in the middle of our spiritual journey that it's not all love and light. It's like, what the heck did I take this course for, right? But if we can breathe through that, because what we understand, what we must know about this process of change, if you read the teachings of Jesus from this perspective, it gives you new insight and awareness, is that we can't move into the kingdom. In order for us to move into this spiritual dimension, this new way of being, we must die to the old. You can't take all of your old baggage into the new experience. And so that which is no longer serving us, that which is causing the discomfort, is what we have to be broken open to be free of. Michael Singer says that the way that we free ourselves is to find ourselves, to find our true self, to find the truth of who we are. And when we do that, then we can begin to enter into that higher state of being. You see, it is a paradox that those entering into the kingdoms most often come into it through pain, through hurt, through injury. If you look at the life of Jesus as we understand it, who did he like to hang out with? It wasn't the upper crust. It wasn't the 1% of his time. It wasn't the Pharisees. In fact, he had a lot of judgment going on about the Pharisees. And what we need to know about the Pharisees is they were sort of the self-righteous, full of themselves, we have the answer people. He didn't hang out with them. In fact, he wasn't calling to them. He liked to hang out with the sinners and the tax collectors. And my guess is the tax collectors then were just about as popular as the tax collectors are today, which is not very popular, right? But what he recognized, what he saw, it was that in the broken places is where the opening comes for greater good. Where we have been hurt, where we have been harmed, where we have experienced that breaking of the heart, is also the gift that allows us to experience this new way of being. So, my friends, my prayer for you is not that your problems go away. My prayer for you is the grace of God to embrace the problems and seek a new way to be in relationship. My prayer for you is not that you will never experience pain, although I don't wish it on anyone. My prayer for you is that if you are experiencing pain, that you embrace it and allow it to transform you, to heal you, that to heal at the source of the problem rather than try and solve the problem itself. Because once we solve the problem at the root, then the problem has no need to exist anymore. Until we solve it at the root, it shows up everywhere. Notice that? You may have noticed now that we've had all this rain and everything's growing, and you go out to your garden and the weeds are like, hello, life, here we are. You think, I thought I pulled you. And what we know is no, until the root is gone, it keeps coming back. So too is that state of consciousness. So we never, ever, ever get to change the past. But we can fundamentally change our relationship with the past. So that then, when we are in that new place, we own our experience, but we're not bound by the experience. We become transcendent of it. We literally use that pain to transform us, to break us open. We allow ourselves to surrender to the divine that wants to express through us. The Master teacher spoke of this dimension as the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, this state of being that recognizes the unity of all that is, that experiences wholeness, that experiences peace, that experiences unconditional love and joy. So sometimes this pain that we experience is simply the invitation to the larger life. So I say, I'm sorry for your pain, and I hope it transcends you. I hope it breaks you wide open so that you might know the truth of who you are and experience the fullness of your life. Let us pray together, shall we? As we simply breathe into this moment, becoming consciously aware of this one life that is expressing in and through and as all of creation. We know that this divine intelligence, whatever name we give it, is the source and the substance of all that is. That this divine intelligence which has expressed itself through this universe, through the galaxies, through the planets in balance and motion, the same divine intelligence which causes the rains to fall, the flowers to grow, life to continue to reveal itself, this same one intelligence is the very life intelligence coursing through each one of us, breathing itself through our breath, beating its heart through us, experiencing itself as us. As we remember this fundamental truth, that in this presence we live and move and have our being, it becomes very easy to speak this word of truth for each of us gathered here. As we open our hearts to the presence of unconditional love, that healing, transformative presence that is without condition, that loves us by loving itself through us. We breathe into the awareness and allow our relationships to be healed and transformed. We allow our relationship with those in our lives to be healed and transformed. We allow our relationship with our past to be healed and transformed. And in truth, we allow our relationship with the future to be healed and transformed because we are open to the presence of absolute unconditional love. We immerse ourselves in the consciousness of wholeness, knowing that that wholeness is coursing through every cell and every system of our physical being. In truth, it is resonating at every level of vibration, from the spiritual to the mental to the emotional to the physical. At every level of being, we are experiencing this divine wholeness right here and right now. We are knowing that we are in an abundant state of mind, always. And so we open our hearts, our minds to this divine presence. We know that we are one with the only source there is, which is Spirit. And therefore we joyously give and graciously receive of the divine bounty. There is a state of constant flow taking place, and we participate in it. How grateful I am to bear witness to the truth. And I know in this moment, right here, right now, that this is the new opportunity. A new choice is made to insulate and protect, or to release and to let go. And so we choose to let go, to surrender to divine love, to divine intelligence, to allow our lives to be healed, transformed, renewed by the renewal of our mind. And it is good, and it is beautiful. We are blessed. And because we are blessed, we extend a blessing. We bless this spiritual community. This community which comes together in common purpose for a greater good, knowing that we are richly blessed, divinely supplied and supported in our good work. We extend that blessing beyond these walls to include all of our brothers and sisters. For there is only one human race, and we are all some part of it. We are holding a high vision for a planet at peace. We're holding that consciousness for a world that works for all. We are entering into this new era of unity and cooperation, and we're naming it good. And as always, we bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of every faith. For we recognize and know there are many pathways to the divine. And we honor and celebrate that where two or more are gathered together in the presence of the I Am, peace unfolds, love is made known. So in joy and gratitude, then, I'm simply giving thanks. I'm giving thanks for this inner realization, for this consciousness of peace, love, joy, and harmony. And I'm giving thanks for a law of mind that operates upon the consciousness to bring forth the highest good for all concerned. And so in joy and gratitude, I simply give great thanks. For I know that it is so, as together we say, and so it is.